Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Vietnam Connection, your go-to source for insightful updates on Vietnam's evolving landscape. Let's dive into the significant developments shaping Vietnam's economy, politics, society, and culture this week. Vietnam just legalized crypto and has big digital ambitions. In a world where most governments are still hand-wringing over what to do with Bitcoin, Vietnam has made a commitment to step fully into the digital future. On June 14, the country's National Assembly passed a comprehensive law on the digital technology industry, and it's a game-changer. Among its boldest moves, crypto assets are now legally recognized. The law will take effect on January 1, 2026 is a broad legal framework that covers cryptocurrencies, AI, semiconductors, digital infrastructure, and even workforce development. This is Vietnam's official pledge of becoming a serious player in the global tech race. The new law describes a two-tiered crypto framework, splitting digital assets into two distinct classes: virtual assets, likely non-financial tokens, loyalty points, or game-related digital goods; crypto assets, assets based on cryptographic and distributed ledger technologies, your Bitcoins, Ethereum, and possibly NFTs. Both categories are distinct from securities, fiat-backed stablecoins, and CBDCs, which remain outside this legislative scope. But the mere fact crypto is recognized, not outlawed, not tolerated in silence, but named in law, puts Vietnam in an elite club. The government is now responsible for hammering out the finer details: licensing requirements, compliance protocols, consumer protections, and anti-money laundering standards. If this law were just about Bitcoin, it'd be noteworthy. But it's so much bigger. This is Vietnam setting the foundation to become Southeast Asia's digital tiger. The law includes tax incentives for companies in AI and semiconductors, R&D subsidies for chip design and data centers, land use and infrastructure support for digital enterprises, curriculum integration of digital and computational skills from school age onward, workforce development funded at the regional level. This law is the first of its kind, a standalone piece of national legislation specifically focused on the digital technology industry. No one else, not Singapore, not South Korea, not the EU, has moved with this kind of legislative decisiveness. The strategy? Lock in crypto, incentivize AI, build semiconductor capacity, and train a digital native workforce. Vietnam is aiming to become an Asia-based alternative to Silicon Valley, with fewer geopolitical strings attached. Next, we turn to Vietnam's FDI number and import-export numbers for the first 5 months. Vietnam's registered FDI in the first 5 months of 2025 hits $18.4 billion, up 51%. According to the Foreign Investment Agency, the FDI flow into the country continued its growth trajectory amid many global economic turbulences. The number of new projects with capital expansion, and transactions for stake acquisitions all increased, showing that foreign investors' confidence in the investment climate continues to be strengthened, the authorities stated in a release. Of the total registered capital, over $7.02 billion was newly registered capital for 1,549 projects. About $8.51 billion was additional capital for 672 existing projects. Capital contributions/stake acquisitions reached $2.85 billion, with 1,358 deals. The processing and manufacturing sector led the pack in terms of the number of newly registered projects, accounting for 38.6%, and projects with capital expansion. Nearly 56.5% of the total registered capital, or over $10.39 billion, up 31.8% year-on-year, came to the manufacturing and processing sector, followed by the real estate sector with 27.1% and $4.99 billion, an over twofold increase. During this period, Vietnam's Department of Customs reported that the country's total trade turnover hit $355.79 billion USD, up 15.7% from last year's figure. Exports and imports accounted for $180.23 billion and $175.56 billion USD, annual increases of 14% and 17.5%, respectively. These figures resulted in a trade surplus of $4.67 billion USD, down 46.4% year-on-year. Next, we have update on U.S.-Vietnam tariff negotiation. As you know, U.S. President Donald Trump on April 2nd announced a massive 46% tariffs on imports from Vietnam. However, on April 9th, Trump dropped this tariffs rate for Vietnam to 10% for a temporary period of 90 days. Since early May, the Vietnamese technical delegation has been working with relevant U.S. agencies on bilateral trade negotiations. Vietnam and the United States has concluded a third round of tariff negotiations in Washington, D.C., which was held from June 9th to 12th. According to Vietnam's Ministry of Industry and Trade, Nguyen Hong Dien, the two sides made significant progress and narrowed the gap in all areas of negotiation. During these 4 days, the Vietnamese and American delegations held candid and constructive discussions on issues of mutual concern. In the final session of technical-level negotiations on June 12th, Minister Dien held a negotiation session with Secretary Howard Lutnick and United States Trade Representative Ambassador Jamieson Greer. For the first time, the U.S. had initiated a ministerial-level dialogue in this format. Dien proposed a number of ideas to accelerate the negotiation process and drive results. Both Lutnick and Greer welcomed the Vietnamese delegation's proposals, largely endorsing them as a basis for further discussions. According to Reuters, the U.S. has demanded a reduction in the use of Chinese components and technology during its tariff negotiations with Vietnam. While Vietnam has become a major production hub for global IT companies like Apple and Samsung Electronics, it still depends considerably on China for sourcing parts, making this a key issue in the negotiations. This move could significantly impact Vietnam's export-oriented growth model, which is heavily reliant on the U.S. market. The U.S. is also pressuring Vietnam to crack down on the transshipment of Chinese goods falsely labeled as "Made in Vietnam," a practice that Vietnam is actively working to curb. In a way to show goodwill and its commitment to narrow the trade imbalance between the two countries, Vietnam's Minister of Agriculture and Environment, Do Duc Duy, led a delegation of nearly 50 agencies, agribusinesses, and associations to the United States from June 2nd to June 6th, 2025, before the aforementioned third round of negotiation to promote trade and increase imports of agricultural and timber products. The delegation held business dialogues in Iowa, Ohio, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. During the trip, Vietnamese businesses signed 20 agreements worth a total of $3 billion to buy U.S. agricultural commodities. Now, it's time for social and cultural news. Vietnam welcomes 9.2 million foreign visitors in first 5 months. That is a 21% increase year-on-year and 15% higher than the same period of pre-COVID levels in 2019. Despite the end of the peak tourism season, May alone saw 1.53 million foreign arrivals, marking the highest number for the month in the past decade, according to the General Statistics Office. Mainland China remained the top source market during the January-May period, with 2.36 million arrivals, followed by South Korea, 1.9 million, Taiwan, 532,000, the U.S., 375,000, and Japan, 342,000. Tourism experts attributed the strong performance to favorable visa policies, expanded promotional campaigns, and a series of events held to celebrate major national holidays. Now, on to our last update. Vietnam abolishes two-child policy amid demographic concerns. In a landmark decision, Vietnam has officially ended its decades-long two-child policy. This move comes as the nation grapples with a declining birth rate, which fell to 1.91 children per woman in 2024, below the replacement level of 2.1. The policy reversal allows couples to freely decide the number and spacing of their children. Vietnam's two-child policy was officially implemented in 1988 to curb rapid population growth in the country, which was experiencing a total fertility rate of over 4 births per woman at the time. However, unlike China's one-child policy, Vietnam did not impose harsh punishments like forced abortions or sterilizations. Enforcement mostly targeted government employees and party members, who were often subject to workplace pressures to comply. For examples, promotion opportunities, performance reviews. For the general population, enforcement was relatively mild, relying more on propaganda and community pressure than on heavy-handed penalties. With the birth rate decreasing below 2.1, the government fears that the demographic trend will result in labor shortages, strain on social welfare systems, and hinder economic growth. To encourage families to have more children, the government is implementing various supportive measures. Healthcare support. Children under 6 years old are entitled to free healthcare services, ensuring early medical support without financial burden. Educational benefits. Public education is tuition-free up to the age of 15. And starting in September 2025, this will extend through the end of high school. Maternity leave. Vietnam offers 6 months of fully paid maternity leave, one of the most generous policies in the region. And that concludes this week's episode of Vietnam Update. If you find the information presented to be valuable, please hit the like and subscribe button or leave a comment, so that we can gauge your interest and incentivize us to bring you more future updates.